Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the Football Friday podcast. Matt Catrillo back here with you. And here with us for the entire show this week, Alex Kozora, fresh off Steelers training camp in Latrobe. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, Catrillo. We got a lot of football to talk about now. It's been a long time, hot minutes, since we've had a lot of football to delve into, so happy to do so.
Yeah, it's finally something tangible on the field with not guys facing the same guys. Now we got guys facing different guys as week one of the preseason is officially underway. Just had the Texans and the Panthers, and now the Eagles and the Packers getting ready to kick off. Same with the Steelers and the Giants as well. So very excited to finally talk about some, we'll call it somewhat real football. We're still a little bit away from the real thing, but the preseason is officially underway. Glad to have it back. And a lot to talk about with both teams. So first, Alex, we'll get to the Steelers. We're going to start with the Eagles first as they play Thursday at 8 o'clock in Green Bay against the Packers. And before we get to what we're looking for specifically in the game coming up here, one thing that popped up in Eagles camp this week that's kind of been the talk in Philly, and I even put a story about it this week on my Pro Football Spot page, is the Jordan Matthews versus Nelson Agholor comparison. Both these guys are going to be competing for time in the slot this year. Of course, we've talked about Nelson Agholor having a really productive camp overall and spring really entire offseason after a really bad ending to the season last year with all the drop passes and the way he conducted himself in the locker room, that meltdown he had. But he's been looking a lot better in camp, and now he's going to be competing now with Jordan Matthews for some time. And if Nelson Agholor were to continue to go trend into the in that upward direction and maybe take some snaps away from Jordan Matthews in a contract year of his rookie deal, maybe he could be trade bait. A lot of speculation there. He could be used for the Eagles to bring in another cornerback. And my piece on Pro Football Spot, Alex, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is the Eagles need to tread carefully with how they were to handle Jordan Matthews before, because Doug Peterson and Frank Reich, Eagles offensive coordinator, have even acknowledged that there's a lot more competition at that spot now, specifically between Agholor and Matthews. And how quickly we forget, A, of what happened with Agholor last year, but B, just how productive Jordan Matthews has been for this team really since day one, since he got drafted in 2014. He's basically been the number one, number two receiver. He's led the Eagles in receptions, yards, and touchdowns, you name it. So the fact that you're thinking about getting rid of him, I get it. You have Alshon Jeffrey and Torrey Smith into the mix now, but after this year, there's really no guarantee they're back in an Eagles uniform next year, number one. Then number two, how all of a sudden, I get it, he's having a good camp, but does Nelson Agholor just get all of this praise? That's what I'm a little bit concerned about. I guess it's probably a little bit of coaches speak, I'm sure, too, to ramp up the competition, but I need to see a lot on the field from Nelson Agholor, and I mean a lot, if I'm even going to think about trading Jordan Matthews and thinking that Agholor can finally step up and be that guy he was supposed to be as a first-round pick in 2015. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I believe the players can, turn things around and look better. And sometimes when you make trades, they're often based off the projections of what other guys have done with smaller workloads. That's usually how this stuff goes. And, you mentioned about players that may not be back in 2018, Jeffrey, Torrey Smith. Well, Jordan Matthews is in that boat. Like you said, a contract year for him. They don't believe that they're going to be able to retain him, whether that his money's going to be too much, the receiver market's always crazy, or that Matthews might not want to come back, or they're going to go a different direction. Then, maybe you can look to try to deal him away and get something out of him, similar to how, you guys acquired Timmy Jernigan. That was mainly because he was in the last year of his deal, and the Ravens knew they were not going to get him back. And so they decided, let's deal Jernigan and get, a third-round pick and, get something out of it. And they did that because they have a guy like Michael Pierce who, does not have the sample size Jernigan did. He was a rookie last year that was a rotational piece, but they're projecting and putting a little bit of faith, sure, but they're projecting that based off his play that he can handle the full-time load. So it's actually a similar situation when you compare, what Baltimore's done and what you guys have done. I don't honestly think a trade's going to actually happen, but I'm more receptive to the idea than you have, because if Agholor has done well, you've added other pieces around him. Matthews in the slot has always kind of been a bit of a weird fit, but I think that I disagree with you slightly on the notion. I would be open to the idea.
Well, the only thing I would say about the Jernigan case is, yes, it seemed that Baltimore wasn't going to retain him after this year, thus they were able to move up 25 spots in the third round this year with the Eagles. But the other part of that equation was his work ethic issues that were starting to come up in that camp, and maybe a change of scenery, of course, will help Jernigan, hopefully for the Eagles' sake. So I think that was part of it, but I get that notion.
Yeah,
but when you bring this back to Jordan Matthews, swing it to his direction, he's still been the most productive the Eagles have had the last couple of years. And
right, but who else has been around him? There hasn't been the weapons.
Exactly. That's exactly my point even further, because then why are you thinking about getting rid of a guy that has been that way and you have nobody else around him at this point?
Well, you have other people around him. What do you mean nobody? You just signed Jeffrey and Torrey Smith.
Oh, I'm talking about prior to is what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, but prior to doesn't matter. Yeah, he was the best option you guys had, but you had no other options, So of course Matthews did well. Now that there's other talent around him, a guy like Matthews isn't seen as the leader in that clubhouse because you've added a ton of talent.
And when you look at Alshon Jeffrey, to add this even further, he's already been hurt, and that was one of my other big concerns about bringing him in during free agency, and he's already probably not going to play tonight. I know I'd rather him be hurt now than later in the season, get him healthy week 1. But
yeah, it's a minor thing.
But at the same time, though, he's had that injury history in the past. I get Torrey Smith has been looking better, and that speed is still there. He's still only 28 years old, but I still need to see some things from him. There's just a lot that I have to see, basically, is my bottom line point to this before I start thinking about moving people around.
But there's a lot that you're not seeing. You haven't really been able to see Aguilar with your own 2 eyes.
Exactly.
You get a chance to tonight. So, if you were watching him, the way that Doug Peterson and company are, that you would have a different opinion on this move than what you do right now.
Right, and as I said with D-Jock last week, there's a lot of questions on all sides of the ball here for the Eagles that I'm waiting to get answered starting Thursday against the Green Bay Packers. And if I do see that from Aguilar, then maybe I'll be a little bit more receptive to the idea. And even if we're seeing a little bit less from Aguilar in the beginning with the bright lights finally on him, the only way I even think about trading away Jordan Matthews and getting some value is the Eagles are just so bad at cornerback right now that if I can get somebody halfway decent, like a Kyle Fuller and or a good draft pick in return, then maybe I think about it. But I still would even do that reluctantly, knowing that there's still a lot of questions to be answered at this point. But I'm just saying overall, I think we got to pump the brakes a little bit, especially when it comes to Nelson Aguilar at this point.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair, and it's a complicated situation. I don't think anyone's saying it's a no-brainer to deal Jordan Matthews, but you understand, what if the team thinks we're not going to get Jordan Matthews back next year? Then I think you really look at the idea of trading him away.
I would definitely think, and then I would be more on board with that, especially if I start seeing, we mentioned Aguilar, then Alshon Jeffrey, and things seem to be working well with him.
Because you have a lot of decisions at wide receiver next year, don't you? I mean, you guys have got a bunch of guys on one-year deals, so you're not going to be able to retain all of them.
It's really the team in general, but especially a wide receiver too. And plus, everyone keeps talking about it every single year, and I'm still waiting for it to happen. When is Zach Ertz going to finally emerge? Everyone's talking about what great chemistry he's developing with Carson Wentz, and we saw that a little bit towards the end of last year, but games didn't count. Trey Burton, everyone's always hyping him up, how he can fit in this offense with the multiple tight end sets that Doug Peterson likes to run. I got to see more from him. So there's just a lot again that has to kind of fall into the equation here going forward. But
sure,
that's just my quick thoughts there on the Jordan Matthews thing. Just pump the brakes a little bit. Let's see what happens with Nelson Aguilar starting against Green Bay on Thursday. So now we get into the thick of things here. Alex, I know you haven't been completely, or obviously you're busy with Steelers stuff and being in Latrobe. We'll get to that in a second. But any quick thoughts? I'll throw to you first on what you may want to see tonight from this game from the Eagles and the Packers on the Eagles side of things.
On the Eagles side of things, you want to start looking at this cornerback group. Is it as bad, on the field as it looks on paper? My guess is yes, which I'm sure is not going to be a comforting thought for you. What's the health of this team right now? Most of the starters are going to play. I haven't.
Yeah, it seems like everybody's. I think the starters, from what we've been hearing, we haven't heard officially yet, is they'll play about a series or two in the first quarter, and that's it. We know Carson Wentz is going to start, and then on the quarterback side of things, Matt McGloin will come in right away. Looks like Nick Foles isn't going to play. He's been dealing with a nagging elbow injury all camp. We mentioned Alshon Jeffrey. There's a chance Brandon Brooks may not play, so then Chance Warmack will get some snaps early at right guard. So there's a couple things there. But as far as defensively goes, everybody's been pretty healthy at the cornerback spot. So it looks like Jalen Mills and Patrick Robinson are going to start, quote-unquote, for now. But the hope is Rasul Douglas, the Eagles' third-round pick out of West Virginia this year, will eventually jump into that starting role. So that's one of the number one guys I'm looking for tonight, at least when it comes to
Yeah,
the cornerbacks.
Douglas was a guy with great ball skills out of West Virginia. I didn't think he had the great.
Yeah, and I think we lost Alex there for a second. Let's see if we can try and get him back. So
Can you hear me, Control?
Yep, I think I got you now.
Okay.
I don't have any video for him, but at least I have your audio, which is the most important.
Well, that's the most important part. Anyway, so what was last? You didn't hear me start talking about Douglas
Yeah,
at
about
all?
Rasul Douglas, you were talking about his good ball skills that he showed on tape, which I agree with, and I kind of lost you after that.
Okay, yeah, I'll start from the top. Yeah, Douglas, a kid out of West Virginia that I like in terms of his ball skills. I didn't think he had the athleticism to be a man-to-man heavy corner, but this is a guy that was a JUCO kid. Came to West Virginia his junior year as a part-time player. Then last year for the Mountaineers, picked off 8 passes. I believe that led or tied for the NCAA lead. So if he can play in some more off-man and preferably zone coverages and let him be able to read and react to the football, click and close, then I think that you could have something there. But I'm interested to watch Douglas for sure. How does he, combat against those 9 balls? Does he have the speed to match? Can he play with good technique and stay in phase? Other guy I like is Ron Brooks, who I think you called the best Eagles corner right now. I like him in Buffalo a good bit, so we'll see what he can do tonight.
Yeah, definitely. I agree on all things, especially with Ron Brooks. I mean, that's pretty sad when your slot cornerback is your top cornerback right now, but that's just, unfortunately, the reality for the Eagles right now.
It's an important position. I don't knock it.
I mean, I think you're going to, at least to start the season, and the way that the Eagles' schedule comes out, is you're going to see the Eagles start in a lot of nickel so they can keep him on the field at least, and who knows how the safeties will work out too, because they like to move Malcolm Jenkins around as well when you get to that point. But going back to Rasul Douglas, yeah, I love his ball skills. That was the one thing that I liked when on his tape as well, and he's definitely a press corner. And that's the one thing I'm also going to look out for tonight. In those situations where he is playing man-to-man, Alex, I'm curious to see how he's going to react to how the officials, the different officiating crews throughout the preseason are going to call and dictate that, because he's already been asking questions about that and having some trouble with that in camp with the officials there. So that's another thing I'm looking out for with Rasul Douglas.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yes, it'll obviously be a very secondary-focused game to talk about some of the pass rush as well, but if the secondary plays as bad as they look, then it doesn't really matter what Carson Wentz and the receivers do. It's going to be a tough season. And also, one other thing I want to look at, 2 other things. Pumphrey, is Pumphrey playing? Because he's got a minor injury, doesn't he?
He does have a minor injury, but I believe he is going to play tonight, and he's on my list too, definitely.
Yeah. See him in the return game. He's obviously profiles as a guy in the return game, but he never had to do it at San Diego State. He was the main workhorse running back out of the backfield. So to see him in a return situation is basically the first time ever we've seen Donnell Pumphrey do that. So I'm curious to see how he succeeds there. And then my personal, draft crush was Corey Clement, who I've heard good things about out of Eagles camp, and I'm sure he'll get a lot of burn tonight in the second half of this one. Yeah,
definitely. The whole running back core, Alex, I'm definitely looking out for tonight. LeGarrette Blount, how's he been looking? You mentioned Donnell Pumphrey and Corey Clement, and also too, Wendell Smallwood. He's been getting a lot of more reps in camp because LeGarrette Blount missed a few days for personal reasons. You mentioned Pumphrey being out. So, and he's supposed to be the guy that hopefully can take more of the workload this year too and be developing as that maybe number 2 back behind LeGarrette Blount. So I'm curious about that. And getting back to the receivers for a sec, Marcus Johnson has really had a nice camp, as well as Greg Ward too, for the Eagles. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do with the lights on them. And last year's camp guy that everybody liked was Paul Turner, and he's had a quiet camp so far. So I'm curious what this is going to mean for him too, with all this new competition now at receiver. So that's another thing I'm looking out for as well. And you mentioned with Pumphrey, getting back to him real quick, for as far as the special teams factor is concerned, it sounds like from what I've been seeing from all the Eagles riders there at the NovaCare complex, he's been struggling fielding punts and kicks. You mentioned that's something that he's never really done before during his time at San Diego State. So now that he's got the lights on him, he's got more pressure on him, he's got guys flying around, can he be able to concentrate and look the ball all the way in before moving on upfield? So that's something I'm going to be looking out for as well.
Yeah, special teams is such a big key for some of these guys, and those are things you just can't come close to replicating to in practice. So when you talk about the third phase of the game, you really get your biggest and only evaluation of that, inside stadium. So Pumphrey, it was definitely foreign to him It's about ball security, being able to judge the football, getting square on punts, getting square on kicks with a good, first step up immediately. We'll see how he does. It'll certainly, like you said, the bright lights will be on him.
And a couple other players I'll mention quickly that I have on my radar tonight. Obviously, Derek Barnett, Eagles' first-round pick, how he fits into the rotation. Where is he from a technique-wise? And some of those additions that he's trying to get in. Mentioned he's been working on a swim move with Eagles defensive line coach Chris Wilson, so I'm curious to see how that's been going. And also, Nate Jerry, who's the Eagles' fifth-round pick. He was a safety from Nebraska. He's making the transition back to linebacker, which he has played before. He hasn't done it since his freshman year at Nebraska. I'm curious to see how that transition's going as well. And, of course, Isaac Seumalo now as presumably the starter at left guard. Those are a couple of guys I'm looking out for the Eagles against the Green Bay Packers. A lot to look out for. So now we go to Pittsburgh, Alex. And first, I know we've been talking about this a lot, but I want to start with Le'Veon Bell first because Devonta Freeman gets the 5-year extension from the Falcons yesterday. $41.25 million deal, $22 million guaranteed. That makes him now the highest paid running back in the NFL. So from a money standpoint, Alex, how much more concerning does this get from Pittsburgh's standpoint?
None at all. I know that question's been asked a lot since the Freeman deal was announced, but I don't think it changes Bell's situation at all. Freeman got less than what the Steelers offered Bell, and it's not going to change what Bell wants at all. He wants probably $15 million. As I said before, the Steelers offer is highly unlikely to not get any better than what they've offered before the July 17th deadline. He'll get tagged again in 2018 and probably walk after that.
Yeah, and there you definitely have it there. I think if you're Pittsburgh, that kind of worked out as far as numbers go, but just the fact that somebody else who's a good back in the league got paid just kind of ups the ante, so to speak. But
Bell's deal would have been more. Freeman got less of an average.
Meaning that Bell's got more of a case of for Pittsburgh to pay him because now you have somebody else and Devonta Freeman, who was a very good, is one of the better backs in the league, that he got paid. So where's my contract?
How does that help Bell's case? The Steelers offered more than what Freeman got. So Bell, of course, was going to get paid more than Freeman. There was never any doubt about that.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Well, either way, he's got to get himself in the camp, I think. And this is still going to be something that's going to linger for the time being. And as I've said before, Bell is only kidding himself with that contract that he was offered by Pittsburgh in the first place, because he's not going to get the money that he wants because of his receiving skills, which also Devonta Freeman has as well. He's very dangerous out of the backfield too. Then he, like I said before, he's kidding himself that he's not going to get any other better deal than from Pittsburgh.
I totally disagree. I think if he gets the open market, he'll get the $15 million per year, and I think he's a better receiver than Freeman, by far. If you put 10 teams competing for him on the open market, and the Steelers were offering Bell around just under $13 million per year, I think it's very logical to assume that some team is going to up the ante and go $15 million per year for Bell. But I don't think he's going to hit the market for 2 years. So
you think either way he'll be a Steeler next year?
Yes, I think they'll franchise tag him. I think they have no other move than that. Now, the interesting discussion from that is what happens. What is Bell's reaction if he gets tagged again? Because Eric Berry got tagged twice, and he said the second time, I'm not playing on a franchise tag. You either give me a long-term deal or I'm sitting out. Now, they got a long-term deal done pretty quickly after that. But again, in Pittsburgh's case, I think a long-term deal would be extremely difficult to do. So that becomes an interesting discussion. But I think they tag him because they're not going to let him walk, and a long-term deal seems highly unlikely at this point. I don't think Bell's going to budge. I don't think the Steelers are going to budge.
Right, and that would be my concern going forward is once you get that tag for the second time, as you mentioned, nobody's going to budge. And then secondly, again, you worry about locker room relationships as well with this continuing to linger for another year, assuming that is the case next year.
Yeah, I don't worry about the locker room too much. Obviously the players want Bell in camp right now. I'm sure there is a sense of frustration, but once he gets in, you come together as a team, you have to leave that stuff at the door. So I think that's a very minor issue compared to some of the big picture stuff.
So let's move on quick to Alejandro Villanueva, Alex, who was one guy that had a contract issue but came in time for camp. He got that 4-year extension. Now he's being evaluated for a concussion after Sunday's practice. No word on his progress. Do you have any updates on that?
He was in pads for the last practice. This will probably be out tomorrow, so we're talking Wednesday's practice. He was in pads. He did not go through team, but he should be fine. There's not a big concern there. I don't think he suffered a concussion.
Okay, so that's good news there for Pittsburgh. And then We're talking about the receiver side of things for the Eagles and who might, if talking about maybe Jordan Matthews might get traded depending on how things shake out. Well, you guys at Steelers Depot, Alex, had a really interesting report on possible receivers who could be traded because the Jets have come up as a candidate since they let go Quincy Enwonwu went down for the year. So your thoughts on who maybe that could be? I know Sammy Coates was listed, Eli Rogers was listed, Darius Hayward-Bay, Kobe Hamilton. I think out of that group, who would you put down if any? What are your thoughts on that situation?
Yeah, and receiver's going to be the toughest decision by far. There are legitimately 8 guys you could keep on the 53, and at max, absolute max, you're going to keep 7. So there's going to be a tough cut to be made no matter what. Justin Hunter obviously had a good start to camp and was pretty much the talk around here. It's been a little quiet since. He's had some injury going on too. I don't know what the issue is. It's causing him to miss a couple practices. If Coates gets back on the field, and I expect Coates to come off pup very shortly. He was running full speed the other day at practice, so he looks pretty good. And if Coates plays like the way he played before he got hurt last year, then that could make Justin Hunter still expendable. You could see, and this is kind of stretching it, but I've kicked around the idea, an Eli Rogers, who I think is going to make this team. But, again, if DeMarcus Ayers gets the punt return job, and if Juju Smith-Schuster really continues to play well in the slot, could that make Rodgers expendable? Rodgers would have some actual value there with the work he did last year and the work we'll do in the preseason. So it's a tough discussion. It's a tough debate. There isn't a right or wrong answer, I don't think. And I think the exciting part will be to let the preseason unfold and kind of tell that story. Guys got to get healthy. Guys got to get back on the field. Martavis Bryant just reinstated. So there's still a lot of unanswered questions right now. So it's hard to give you an exact answer to who I would trade. But it's certainly possible they could make a move.
Yes, finally with Martavis Bryant, though. He's still not out of the woods yet. He's just cleared for the preseason.
All right, well, I'll take it because I was just get him on the field, get him in practice, get him in football shape, and we'll go from there.
And I know we talked about this in nauseam, Alex, and we won't spend a whole lot of time on this again, but it's just, it goes back to what we've talked about numerous times, with the NFL constantly dragging their feet and not learning from various investigations. I mean, it just over and over again.
Yeah, no, again, we don't know all the details of it, but it just appeared that the NFL was dragging their feet with, I guess, vetting whatever, clinic and resources and rehab that Bryant was choosing for Latrobe, and now we're almost out of Latrobe, and now the NFL gives him the okay. So, they twisted the knife a little bit more by clearing him after the last practice before the first game. Now there's no training camp practice until Sunday, so Bryant's got to wait, all the longer, and definitely will not play against the Giants Friday.
Yeah, geez, it's just a train wreck, and I don't know if you can hear Alex. I now have the train situation now that you always have in your home.
Do you? I don't hear it, so that's good. How close are you to the tracks?
It's like maybe about a block or so from my apartment here in central Pennsylvania. I just didn't know if you heard that.
Sounds good on my end. Yeah, I can't hear it.
All right.
Have fun with that.
There we go. Well, I like trains, so I don't mind it, but just in this capacity where I need to have clean audio, I don't like to hear that at this point, as obviously you are aware. But yes. I just thought I'd throw that out there. So let's go on to what you're looking for now. I know you released your first roster predictions on Steelers Depot the other day. So get your thoughts on that and what now you're looking for the game against the Giants.
Josh Dobbs is going to start. It's going to be interesting.
Right.
He'll get some work with first team. Now, some guys won't play. Ben, obviously, Josh Dobbs is starting. Antonio Brown will not play. My guess is Pouncey will not be playing either. He's got, I think, reportedly a cut on his leg that's kind of held him out of practice. But he'll still get work with some of the first team guys. So, how does Dobbs handle the bright lights? I think he'll do well. I think his command of the huddle, I think ability to feel the rush, climb the pocket, make accurate throws in the run. I think it's all been positive for Josh Dobbs so far. But, can that accuracy in the short and intermediate routes be consistent? That might be one area that he struggled in so far. And can he get down and slide whenever, he takes off and runs? So Dobbs obviously getting our first real look at him when there's not a training camp environment where your offensive coordinator is 5 feet away from you that you can talk to after the play or, get the call if you screw something up. So that's going to be obviously the biggest thing I think most Steeler fans will be looking for. Elsewhere, the rookies, of course, Juju Smith-Schuster, TJ Watt have enjoyed really good camps. I wouldn't expect some of the other rookies to play. Doubt James Conner will. Cam Sutton will not. But Watt and Juju, the top 2 guys, will be fun to check out. And just the pass rushers, Bud Dupree, how does he look coming into as I've talked about a lot, a critical year 3 Dupree, hopefully he'll play. I think he will. And obviously that'll be a good starting point to figure out how much progress he's made so far.
Yeah, and you had interesting notes about that in one of your practice notes. I can't remember if it was from yesterday or the day before about him dropping into coverage, and that's been a little bit of a concern for Bud Dupree now.
Yeah, I think he'll do well in some of his zone drops. He's not going to be terrible at it, but he's just a bigger guy that I think struggles to sink his hips and be able to break with guys in man coverage. And you see in some of these one-on-one drills, which again are skewed for the offense. But when you're facing some slow-footed tight ends, guys like David Johnson, guys like Jake McGee, and you see Dupree struggle to even contest at the catch point. He could struggle in straight man coverage in some of those zones that become man when the running back or the tight end gets into his area. So obviously his main goal this year is rushing the quarterback and playing at left outside linebacker. In the Steelers defense, they typically drop a little bit less than the right side, so that's good news there. But that's one thing to keep an eye on. How does Dupree do in coverage? And I think he'll be just okay at it.
Yeah, I'll definitely be looking out for that in the game against the Giants coming up here. And going back to the offensive side of the ball, Alex, I think, and tying this back to what we were talking about the possible trade talk with some of the receivers here, with being very deep in camp, is I think the play, and this is pretty much obvious, but the play of Juju Smith-Schuster I think is going to determine a lot of things. If he's able to shine right away, then I think Eli Rogers becomes a trade bait candidate possibly, because Juju Smith-Schuster would take over in the slot. If he doesn't, then it kind of makes things a little bit more complicated. I think the health of Sammy Coates, too, and what he can do, if he can turn things around, that's going to determine a lot. So I'm watching those secondary guys in the receiving core. I think that's one of the most important things to look at for the receivers and the offense for the Steelers. And secondly, Josh Dobbs, first start in the NFL, even though it's a preseason, it's on the road, and he's going to be facing a pretty good defense in the New York Giants. So there's a lot of good stuff to look for the Steelers, even though a lot of the starters aren't going to play.
Yeah, certainly. And in the secondary, that 6 cornerback spot is pretty open right now. Senquez Golson will not play, but you have Brian Allen, Mike Hilton, who's probably been the biggest camp sleeper. Special teams, like I said, you don't get the feel for that in training camp practices. You get a feel for that in stadiums. I'm bummed that a guy like DeMarcus Ayers, one of the other receivers fighting for a spot, is unlikely to play because his path to the 53 is being the punt returner and knocking off AB. But obviously, he's not going to be able to do that against the Giants if he doesn't play. So, that could be something that would hurt him a good bit. So, yeah, there's a lot of there's not a lot of clarity in the back end of the roster at a couple key spots, wide receiver, corner, that hopefully these games will be able to tell us about.
Speaking of receiver, you mentioned a name that has started to come up and has really been productive all camp. Mike Hilton, tell me more about him.
He's a corner.
Oh, corner. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, he's the other Ole Miss corner. He went to Ole Miss like Golson, but Golson's been on the shelf and Hilton's been making plays. He's a small guy. He's like 5'8", $180, but he plays physical. He does well to find the football, play the pocket, time his jump. So, I've really been impressed with Mike Hilton. And I knew that he would have some talent. And I talked to him before camp started, and he's always, said that he's approached everything with confidence, assuming he's the best guy out there and he can do whatever he wants to do. He doesn't back down from a challenge. And, he's certainly been making a push and doing everything he can to try to make his 53-man roster. But again, his path will be on special teams. And we're going to get a look at him, I'm sure, as a gunner. And, opposite of Brian Allen, who's kind of in a similar boat. Whoever might do a better job there could get that last cornerback spot.
Man, I'll tell you what, rotten luck Senquez Golson has had, and it looks like it may cost him a roster spot now.
Yeah, he's still missing time. It doesn't sound like he's going to get back anytime soon.
Yeah, that hamstring injury that someone from the Post-Gazette had mentioned.
Yeah, he's in 3 years with the team. He has been in 7 practices and completed 5 of them. So you feel for the guy for sure.
That's just that. I mean, your heart sinks when you hear, because this was a guy that the Steelers really liked too.
Yeah, of course, he was a 2nd-round pick, so yeah, of course they liked him.
Yeah. Well, it's unfortunate there, but at least you have other guys that have stepped up so far in that cornerback area, and that'll be another spot to look out for. And it's disappointing that James Conner isn't going to play. Of course, now that Bell's out, or some guys to look out for at running back.
Yeah, Connor unlikely to play. He's been in pads, but he hasn't been in team sessions, so it doesn't seem likely there. But yeah, Fitz Toussaint should start. Now Davis, I'm interested to watch. Terrell Watson, a small school guy who actually was with your Eagles last year, I think, had a rushing touchdown against the Cowboys.
Yes, that's right.
He's impressed Tomlin in camp, so he could get some short order work, and definitely want to check him out.
Actually, that reminds me. I think you put out, it was either in your notes or you put a stat out on Twitter. Fitzgerald Toussaint has so far yet to fumble in camp. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Ball security is so paramount for any running back, and Toussaint is a vet guy that takes care of the football. He's lost a little bit of weight. He looks more explosive, but he still runs with some power. So Toussaint, I still think Niall Davis will make the roster as of today, but Toussaint certainly having a nice camp.
All right, so there's those some nuggets to look out for Steelers Nation as the Steelers get ready to take on the Giants on Friday, first game of the preseason. That'll be fun to watch Josh Dobbs get out there and see what he can do with not having Landry Jones or Big Ben playing, so keep a lookout for that. And the last thing we're going to talk about today, Alex, we haven't gotten your thoughts yet on this, and I'm really, really curious to get your thoughts on this, is the protest apparently that occurred yesterday, on Wednesday, outside the NFL headquarters for support of Colin Kaepernick. Apparently, Spike Lee was involved in some sort of way, though he's denied it on Twitter. And D-Jock and I kind of started talking about this last week of where we both stand on this issue. Is Colin Kaepernick being blackballed by coaches and GMs of having a chance to play in camp, or getting a little bit deep into training camps now in week 1 of the preseason? What are your thoughts on this, Alex? Do you think Kaepernick is being blackballed here, or do you think his play is also a little bit of a factor here? Because that's my view on this.
Well, it's not black and white. You can't say it's all about his political stances. You can't say it's all about his play. There's a mixture of both. If this was Aaron Rodgers, obviously Aaron Rodgers would have a job. But clearly, I think the idea that the political factor is playing no role at all is ludicrous. I mean, Steve Biscotti, the owner of the Ravens, was telling fans to pray for them. You don't do that when you make a football decision about if a guy can play or not. You do that when it's other off the field stuff.
Right.
The talent alone, he deserves to be in a camp. I mean, he played well last year on a really bad 49ers team. When Blaine Gabbert struggled, Kaepernick shined. What do you think? 16 touchdowns and only 4 picks. And obviously, coaches and teams have wanted to bring him into camp. The Ravens, for example, with John Harbaugh, wanted him in camp, and the owner shot him down. Now, what's that decision? It's not a play decision because the coach is going to know if the guy can play or not better than the owner. So it's other factors, and clearly it's his political stances. So I think that's the dominating factor here is Kaepernick's stances, but play would have a minor role in that, sure.
And I basically agree with that stance, because if Kaepernick, and this is my whole thing, other than the year he had with the 49ers and being a couple plays away from winning the Super Bowl against the Ravens, other than that, he really hasn't proven, to me at least, that he can win consistently in this league, because since then, once you get that tape to defensive coordinators, and I tell you, it's unless you're a Russell Wilson, basically, a guy who can still stand in the pocket and throw the ball, guys like that are running quarterbacks, if quote unquote, if you will, just for lack of a better term right now for this argument, are going to get figured out and have been figured out by defensive coordinators. So if you prove to me you can't win in this league consistently, plus you have this backlash behind you, then why am I even going to bother bringing you in at this point with all this, if you have all this other political backlash behind you? So I really don't necessarily blame the owners for wanting to bring in Kaepernick into their camp. Now, I can understand why the coaches like John Harbaugh would want to bring him in, because they have no other options. But I'm okay with the owners saying no to him.
But you recognize that in the case of Baltimore, that was a move solely made because of his political, controversy, not because of play.
Right. Now, I think Baltimore is a little bit different in this sense, because they had the Ray Rice issue happen and how poorly that was handled. So I think Steve Bisciotti in this case is watching himself a little bit.
Punching a woman in an elevator and Colin Kaepernick taking a knee.
No, but
you can't call them the same.
Well, I'm not. What I'm saying is they've already had one. They've already mishandled one bad incident off the field with a player that has some talent and Ray Rice. So I just think Steve Bisciotti's just being extra cautious. I'm not trying to compare the two
I'm just asking you to
situations.
recognize that in case of Baltimore, you can't use his poor play as an argument at all because the coach wanted to bring him in. The coach thought he could play. You have to say that is 100% a political,
Yeah,
stance.
and in this case, it is, and I'm not naive, and I'm not being naive in saying that. But what I'm saying is, this is if you're other NFL owner other than Steve Bisciotti, then I can't necessarily blame them for bringing him in because you weigh both those factors.
Baltimore is the closest to signing him so far. They're the closest to entertaining the idea. So, and that was shut down because of Kaepernick's political controversy. But again, I understand Kaepernick has not won a lot of games. That's because the 49ers have been straight garbage the last 2 years, since Harbaugh has been gone. Kaepernick did well last year, 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. That on an awful 49ers team with absolutely no weapons to throw to. He played well, and I don't think anyone can deny that.
Right. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves, and
okay, well there you go. But your premise was that he can't play. But last year he showed he could play.
I just don't think he's consistent. That's
well,
my
when you're on
stance.
an awful 49ers team, I think you're going to be inconsistent.
But even before his season last year, I mean, there was a lot of mechanical issues that coaches themselves had said they had their concerns with, and just his style of play. It's always figured out eventually by NFL defensive coordinators.
Well, it wasn't figured out last year, and it's been on tape for several years now.
But he still hasn't won games. I get he hasn't had a lot.
Because he was on awful 49ers teams. How is he supposed to win with there's no help at all?
I get that, but I just think overall his style of play still doesn't work in the NFL, regardless of what is.
I'm just trying to figure out what your main argument is, because you said he can't play because he can't win, but then we pointed out why he's not winning because his teams have just been awful. But then you said his style of play is figured out, but it's not figured out because he had a great year last year on a terrible 49ers team. So if it's not about the winning, it's not about the style of play because he has not been figured out, then what's the issue?
I still think overall he's been kind of figured out a little bit.
But how did he play so well last year then?
That was
you agree he played well last year, right?
For the most part, yeah.
Okay, so how is that being figured out when you played well last year on a bad team?
Well, I'm just talking about from an overall standpoint. He has been inconsistent.
Yeah, I mean, sure, he's not Aaron Rodgers. He's not Tom Brady. Of course, he's not a top 10 quarterback in the league. And basically, if you're not a top 10 quarterback, most of the guys below that are inconsistent. But his talent clearly warrants being in a camp. Do you agree?
Overall, I mean, like I said, I'm hesitant to bring him in overall.
Because why?
Because I think back to what I said before, if he's not been consistent winning games, which is what you look for in a quarterback, and he has this other nonsense off the field, then I don't bring him in if I'm an NFL owner. How can you
expect him to win games on that 49ers team last year? That you recognize that 49ers team was horrible,
I think this 49ers team is an exception because they were so bad. But I'm talking about even when he had halfway decent players around him, he still couldn't win games. Even before last year.
Like what year?
Well, last year was 2015, 2014. He didn't do anything spectacular.
Well, how did the 49ers do? They went 5-11 with Thomas Sula as their quarterback. And Kaepernick only started 8 of those games. So the 49ers were bad in 2015. You agree the 49ers were bad in 2015?
Yes, they were bad. They've been bad pretty much since that Super Bowl run that they've had.
Right.
But a lot of the play, I mean, there was a reason why Jim Tom Sula sacked Colin Kaepernick, if I remember correctly.
Well, okay, what was the reason?
Because he wasn't playing well. He was turning the ball over.
Okay, he had 5 interceptions in 2015. Not that bad in 8 starts. On still a bad team without weapons. Last year was even worse team without weapons. Yeah, I get Kaepernick. Of course, you can point out flaws in his style and this, that, and the other. That's fine. I think some of it's not true. To call him assistant quarterback, which I know you have not, but many do, is incorrect. He can play in a pro-style offense. The bottom line is, look what he did last year. He had a really good year last year. We both agree about that. His talent, it speaks for itself and is worthy of being in camp as being a top 90 quarterback in this league. So when you look at teams like Baltimore, they're making these decisions solely based off the political controversy and leanings that Kaepernick has expressed.
Right, and their situation, it totally was. But again, I say that the mindset of Steve Bisciotti was that he's being a little bit more cautious because even though it's two totally different situations, and I completely understand that, and I'm not trying to compare the two, but I'm just saying he's just being a little overly cautious, and
Well,
that's why they didn't bring
I think
him
when
in.
you want to avoid bad PR, if you're Baltimore, don't ask Ray Lewis for your thoughts on
Oh,
if
I
Kaepernick is a good fit.
totally agree, and that looks horrible on their part.
Right.
I don't understand
So
that.
clearly, Biscardi's not worried about PR. Otherwise, you wouldn't ask Ray Lewis. You know, or I don't know what he's
Well, I mean,
thinking. If he's worried
that's a
about
fair
PR,
point,
then he
but
asks
Ray Lewis isn't in camp anymore. I get that looks terrible that he would go to him for advice. I get that, but he's still not a guy that he's going to bring in anymore. Is what I'm saying. The fact that he doesn't want to bring anybody in with any more political backlash after the Ray Rice situation happened is what I'm trying to say.
And I agree. That's the reason why. I'm just making sure that you agree with me that the reason why Colin Kaepernick is not a Baltimore Raven today is 100% because
Yes, definitely, I agree. But you're right. I totally agree with that. I'd be naive if I didn't say
I'm guessing a lot of other owners feel the same way. They just haven't had to face the conversation because they haven't had the injuries like Baltimore.
I guess that's a fair point, but I just think if he had won more games, then maybe this is a different conversation.
But how can you expect him to win more games? We agree he was on terrible teams.
But I get it. But this is the NFL,
we agree
though.
that he played well last year. It's not his fault. Is it Kaepernick's fault that the 49ers didn't win games last year?
Not necessarily. I mean,
Okay, so then how can you knock him for not winning games when you say it's not his
because
fault?
we're talking about his overall career here. I'm not talking about last year. Last year's over. I'm talking about his overall career. Ever since that Super Bowl run, he hasn't been consistent, and the coaching staff he's had his mechanics fixed up and everything else.
The teams have gotten immediately tanked. Since Harbaugh's been gone, Balky has run that team into the ground, and they've been bad teams. You agree that the 49ers have been bad since the Super Bowl?
Yes, they have been terrible.
So it's hard to pin it all on Kaepernick. Really, in the last 2 years, where his win-loss records have been
right. You can't.
awful.
Of course, you can't put it all on Kaepernick because it's been that bad. But what I'm saying is, still, there's a lot of flaws in his game that haven't led him to being consistent. And I think having this other backlash behind him, I'm saying it's all part of the decision making of the owners saying I don't want him on my team right now.
Well, let me ask you this, and then we'll wrap up the discussion. What do you think is the bigger driving factor of why Kaepernick is not on his roster right now? Is it because of his play, or is it because of the off-the-field political stuff?
I'm going to say probably more. I'm going to probably say more his off-the-field stuff, but I still think even whether he does have this or not, if he had been, I'll say this again, consistency and wins, and that's the way the NFL is, whether it's fair, unfair, or indifferent. If he had won more, he'd be on an NFL roster right now.
Well, when you see Baltimore bringing guys from like the AFL, is that because they were consistent and they won in the NFL? Clearly not. So, okay, let me ask you this way instead. So to try to, because I want to pin down where you're at. I want to understand your thoughts better, Catrillo. And this is going to be a little arbitrary to do, but work with me here. Give me a percent. What is the percent of why, out of 100%, of course, what is the percentage of the factors being Kaepernick not on a roster because of his political stuff versus play? Is it like a 50-50 thing where it's half play, half political? Is it 70-30? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much split right down the middle. I'm going to go 55-50 backlash versus play.
Okay, I'm going to say it's like 80% political, 20% play, because I think he could show that he can play, and if he didn't have the political stuff with him, he'd be on a roster months ago.
Okay, and there's where we both stand from the numbers standpoint.
All right,
but and as far as him, what are your chances? I'm sure if there's an injury in a camp, do you think he will find a way to get on?
No, I don't think he's going to be in a camp.
I agree. I don't think he plays at all this year. Yeah. So it's an interesting, I don't want to say interesting topic, but it's another issue that is continuing to cloud over the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's just the way it is. But getting back to on the field and what matters most there, Steelers and Eagles getting ready to play their preseason game. So Eagles playing Thursday at 8 o'clock against Green Bay. Steelers play at 7 against the New York Giants, and we'll be wrapping up and talking about that. Get ready for the next set of games coming up next week on the show. So that is going to do it for this week. Again, you ready for week 1 of the preseason. Alex, enjoy the game on Friday and enjoy the rest of your time in Latrobe.
Thank you. And yeah, enjoy the Eagles game tonight.
Definitely will. And make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at FFPodcast1 for the latest show archives, NFL breaking news, and notes. You can follow me on Twitter at MCatrillo. Alex is on Twitter at Alex_Kozora. And the Football Friday YouTube page at Football Friday for all of our latest show archives. You can find all of that there. So make sure you're able to do so. And also, don't forget, you can send us your questions before every show that we do. We'll put it out. And I was a little bit late today doing that this week, but usually about a half hour before we record. You can tweet them at us personally at the Football Friday Twitter page at FFPodcast1. We're always here to take your questions for anything Eagles, Steelers, or NFL related. So that's just going to do it for this week's edition of the show. For Alex Kozora, I'm Matt Catrillo. Thanks so much for listening to the Football Friday podcast.